Chinese President Xi Jinping is on his way to Russia for a two-day visit. Russian leader Vladimir Putin is welcoming what he calls China's constructive role in trying to end the war in Ukraine. Xi says the relationship with Russia is an all-encompassing partnership. Katrina Yu reports from Beijing.
Xi Jinping has visited Russia 8 times since becoming Chinese president. His most recent trip was in June 2019 during an economic forum. Xi will travel there again in what's expected to be a major show of Chinese support for Moscow as it continues its invasion of Ukraine.
With China and Russia working together, the world will have the driving force toward multipolarity and a greater democracy in international relations. And a global strategic balance and stability will be better ensured.
The visit comes as China seeks to expand its role as a global leader and mediator. Earlier this month, it brokered a deal to end 7 years of strained relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Some analysts believe it can do the same for Russia and Ukraine. In February, Chinese officials released a peace plan calling for a ceasefire and dialogue between both sides.
The Chinese understanding is, after several months, both parties are exhausted and they want to have the forum to start peace talks. China can offer that, and no other country can do that.
But others say Beijing is reluctant and unable to play this role due to the West's extensive backing of Kiev.
It is great power geopolitics going on there. It's very difficult to play a mediating role in that context, and the stakes are very high. Russia and Ukraine do not want to negotiate at the moment, so there is very little China can play with.
Beijing relies on economic trade with Europe and says it's impartial in the war, but its claims of neutrality have been questioned. Last year, Xi declared a no-limits partnership with Moscow. Expanding trade between the two countries has become an economic lifeline for the sanction-hit country. Xi and Putin are also good friends and have met 40 times, including on Putin's birthday. The United States says China is considering providing military support to Russia, which Beijing denies.
Xi is reportedly planning to speak to Volodymyr Zelensky following his Moscow visit. It would be Xi's first conversation with the Ukrainian president since hostilities broke out. Kiev says it's cautiously receptive to Beijing's involvement, but a withdrawal of Russian forces from any occupied territory must be included in any peace deal. Katrina Yu, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
Well, both presidents released news articles in state media ahead of Monday's visit. Xi wrote in a Russian newspaper that relations between the two countries are based on non-alignment and non-confrontation against third parties. He also stressed that China is pursuing reconciliation and peace in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Putin's article in China's People's Daily accused the U.S. of following a strategy of double deterrence of Russia and China. Putin said it's becoming more acute and assertive. Well, Katrina Yu's joining us now from Beijing. So what is President Xi actually hoping to achieve with this?
Well, according to the article he published in Russian state media on Monday, President Xi Jinping says that this is a mission of peace and friendship. He wants to expand Moscow's relationship with Beijing. And according to Beijing, it's important for the international community that Russia and China are close in order to provide some stability in a multipolar system and balance what Beijing says is the hegemonic bullying of the US and other Western powers. Of course, a big part of this trip also is expanding economic ties. Trade between Russia and China is now worth about $190 billion, and that soared since Russia has invaded Ukraine by about 30%, and a lot of that is cheap oil and gas that China gets, and that's very beneficial, of course, for Beijing. But also, Xi Jinping is going to Russia to shore up his support from Vladimir Putin at a time when Beijing is really facing increasing tensions, increasing rivalry with the United States as allies and even European partners. And Beijing wants to make sure that Russia is always in its corner. And of course, this is going to be a huge diplomatic symbol as well to the world. This is the biggest show of support that Russia will have received since the beginning of its invasion of Ukraine. It's a big symbol of solidarity that Beijing is showing with Russia. And I think because Russia is so important for China Xi Jinping is doing what he can in this visit to somehow legitimize Vladimir Putin and his war effort in Ukraine. And of course, he says he's also going to share his ideas about how to end the crisis and the war there, although he has failed to blame Russia or to condemn this invasion of Kiev.
We heard in your report just a couple of moments ago, Alexander Korolev from the University of New South Wales saying that Russia and Ukraine don't want to negotiate at the moment. Do we have any indication from this visit how this will influence the attempts to mediate in the Ukraine war?
Well, it's an interesting time, and certainly it's significant that China has just come off the successful brokering of a peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, who were estranged for 7 years. And Xi Jinping is definitely wanting to capitalize on that success and put forward China as a global leader, an alternative to the United States, and yes, even a mediator. And I've heard analysts speak on two points about whether it can successfully mediate between Ukraine and Russia. On one side, China is a partner, unlike the United States, which is able to talk to, theoretically at least, both Ukraine and Russia. And it says that it's an impartial and neutral party. But the way that this is not different from the way that this is not the same as the situation in the Middle East with Saudi Arabia and Iran is that we have very strong, extensive and clear military backing of Ukraine by the United States, by several European countries. And China, at the same time, is trying to also balance its own interests and its own relationship with Europe. It needs trade with Europe to survive economically. And at the same time, it doesn't want to poke the Russian bear, so to speak. It doesn't want to do anything to make this relationship with Moscow vulnerable, because they want to make sure that Vladimir Putin is very much on the side of Beijing when Beijing needs it to be when it comes to issues around Taiwan, the South China Sea, for example. So it will be interesting to see how far Xi Jinping goes when he visits Russia, when he talks to Vladimir Putin. But at least he can say, well, we tried to mediate talks, we tried to push for dialogue and push for peace. And even if Beijing is not fully successful at this end, it will say that it pushed its effort and pushed its image as a negotiator, as a neutral party in this conflict, and as a global leader.
Katrina Yu talking to us from Beijing. Katrina, thank you very much indeed.